So all of us know that we are supposed to be a part of God's Great Commission. Matthew 28:18 through 20, Jesus commissions us. He says, all authority has been given to him in heaven and on earth. Therefore, we are to go and make disciples of all nations, to baptize them, to teach them to obey. And Jesus says he'll be with us always, even to the end of the age, as we go about fulfilling this Great Commission. But I think for many of us who have been walking with Jesus maybe for many years, some of us may be new believers, we don't sometimes feel up to the task, or maybe we know we're supposed to be a part of it, but we're not quite sure how we're to do that. And so we want to ask this question: why? Why aren't more Christians a part of God's Great Commission? And I think this is a very important question, and we're going to explore that by looking at a passage in the New Testament. We're going to look at 2 Corinthians 5:17 through 21. Very familiar passage. I'm going to go ahead and read that now. 2 Corinthians 5:17 through 21. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, and see, the new has come. Everything is from God, who has reconciled us to himself through Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them. And he has committed the message of reconciliation to us. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, since God is making an appeal through us. We plead on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. He made the one who did not know sin to be sin for us, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. And so for many of us, we've received this. We know this passage. Verse 17 says we are what in Christ? We are new creations, new creatures in Christ Jesus. And this is a magnificent promise of the scriptures, that we are new. Our sin is no more. The old is past and the new has come. But we also want to take a look at, how did this happen? How did we become new? And so he gives us an outline for how this happens. In verse 21, it says, we give Jesus something. On the cross, he took upon himself what? He took all of our sin. So what do we give Jesus? We give Jesus our sin. But in exchange for our sin, verse 21 says we receive something from Jesus. What do we receive from Jesus in verse 21? It says that we receive his righteousness. So this is how we become new. When we put our faith in Jesus Christ, he takes our sin upon the cross, and in exchange for our sin, he gives us his righteousness. Now, this is a pretty good trade, wouldn't you say? We give sin, he gives righteousness. And so we call this the Jesus exchange. This is how we have become new in Christ. But God's desire isn't to only save us. Who does he want to save, according to this passage? It says that he's reconciling the world to himself. So he's called us to represent him in the world. He says that we are to be his ambassadors. And so when you think about an ambassadorship, what does it mean to be an ambassador? What does that word mean? It typically means a representative. And so if we have an ambassador of the United States in a foreign land, Germany, that ambassador will represent the interests of our country in a foreign land. And so God says that we are his ambassadors. So we represent the interests of God in a foreign land. And so when you think about all the titles, all the roles that there are in the world, this might be the most significant, the most important role that any of us will ever have. We are called to be ambassadors for God. We are called to represent the interests of God here on earth. That's a pretty big title and a pretty important one. And so we want to take it seriously. And in this passage, he gives ambassadors two things, two roles that we have to fulfill to be good ambassadors. He gives us something in verse 18, and he gives us something in verse 19. So look at those two passages and tell me, what has God given the ambassador? What role do we play? So in verse 18 and verse 19, 18, he gives us a ministry of reconciliation. Now, most of us think ministry is maybe just for a few select people within the church. But according to this, if you are a new creature in Christ Jesus, if you've given Jesus your sin, and you received his righteousness in exchange, you are a new creature and have been called to be an ambassador for Christ. And therefore, as an ambassador, you have a ministry. So everyone in the church has a ministry. In verse 19, he gives us the message of reconciliation. What is the message of reconciliation? For us, that is simply the gospel. It's the good news that Jesus came, he died, he rose again, and all who put their faith in him can be saved. And so we've been given this message, this responsibility as ambassadors to represent God on earth. We've been given a ministry and a message. So when you think about the context of the local church, for all of us, who's exempt from this work? Nobody. If, again, we are new creatures in Christ Jesus, and we have become ambassadors and have a ministry and a message, we are all called to this work. So this really answers the question, why do we do this? Why do we seek to fulfill the Great Commission? And ultimately, it comes down to, it's our identity. This is who God has created us to be. If we are new creatures in Christ Jesus, if we are new creations, then God has made us ambassadors. And we all have a ministry and a message. In God's mission to reconcile the world to himself, he uses all of us. And that's a pretty amazing thing. And so I would encourage you to take this tool and try to reproduce it. This is a great tool to share with existing believers, people who might not fully understand their identity and their role in God's kingdom work. And for new believers, this is a great piece to help them understand, what did God do to make me new? How did this take place? And now what is my identity? All believers need to understand who they are in Christ, and in order for us to fulfill what God desires for us. So this answers this first question, why do we do it? Because it's who God's created us to be as new creatures in Christ Jesus. We are ambassadors with a ministry and a message. God bless.